Have you ever wondered how close you are to crossing the line into your own moral abyss? That pivotal moment where exemplary behavior could unravel, exposing the dark and unsettling depths of human nature. Picture this. You're seated at your desk, trapped in the monotony of daily life, when suddenly you're thrust into a situation where the rules of decency no longer apply. Would you remain the virtuous person you believe yourself to be, or would you stumble into the abyss, fighting a desperate and inevitable descent? Recently, I stumbled across a work that captured my attention and shook me to the core. The Lucifer Effect by Philip Zimbardo. This book doesn't just ask the unsettling question of why good people turn bad. It offers a brutal, almost unnerving answer. Evil may be closer to you than you imagine. Yes, you. But before panic sets in, let me guide you through this grim labyrinth of human psychology. Buckle up. The journey will be intense. Let's start by confronting the image you have of yourself. You, dear viewer, probably see yourself as a good person. Perhaps you've returned a lost wallet or volunteered your free time at an animal shelter. But let's be honest for a moment. Haven't you ever yielded to a small temptation, knowing no one would notice? Maybe you've pocketed a pen from work or borrowed your neighbor's Wi-Fi without asking. These questions are far from trivial. Zimbardo, with disconcerting clarity, shows us that evil doesn't appear as a distant, incomprehensible force. It starts subtly, with small, seemingly harmless transgressions that gradually nudge us down a perilous path. Think of the case of Ivan Chip Frederick, a name you might not recognize, but whose story deserves your attention. Frederick was an ordinary American, the kind who grew up playing baseball and enjoying his mother's apple pie. Yet, he ended up at Abu Ghraib, the notorious prison in Iraq, where unimaginable acts of cruelty were inflicted on prisoners. The shocking detail: before being stationed there, Frederick was just a regular guy, mentally stable, patriotic, and with no history of violence. But the toxic environment of Abu Ghraib transformed him into something he never thought he could become. If you believe your reality is different, prepare for an unsettling revelation. The line between good and evil is much thinner than you'd like to admit. You may cling to the comforting idea that you are inherently good, that your personality is as unchanging as the stars. But let me dispel that illusion. Zimbardo introduces the concept of situational forces, a perspective that is both liberating and terrifying. Your identity isn't etched in stone, it's written in sand, constantly reshaped by the environment around you. Consider this. How do you behave around your closest friends compared to when you're interacting with a child? Are you truly the same person in both scenarios? Of course not. Now let's take it further. Imagine participating in the infamous Milgram experiment, one of the most chilling studies of human behavior. You are assigned the role of a teacher, instructed to administer increasingly intense electric shocks to a learner every time they make a mistake. The shocks start mild, but escalate to potentially lethal levels of 450 volts. The learner screams, begs, and pleads for you to stop, but you continue. Why? Because a figure of authority, dressed in a lab coat, tells you to. Incredibly, 65% of participants, ordinary people like you, went all the way to the maximum voltage. They weren't sadists. They were normal individuals shaped by the pressures of authority and the situation. Zimbardo didn't just theorize about this. He tested it through one of psychology's most controversial studies, the Stanford prison experiment. Picture this: 24 college students, all mentally sound and from middle-class backgrounds, are placed in a simulated prison. Half become guards, equipped with uniforms, sunglasses, and batons. The other half are prisoners, stripped of their identities and reduced to numbers. What begins as a harmless simulation spirals into a psychological nightmare. In just 6 days, the guards, once ordinary young adults, devolve into tyrants. They force prisoners to urinate in buckets, strip naked, and endure confinement in small, dark spaces. One particularly cruel guard, nicknamed John Wayne, devised humiliating punishments with alarming enthusiasm. The experiment was terminated early, but its lesson remains haunting. Under the right conditions, human morality can crumble faster than a sand castle in a hurricane. Why do some succumb to chaos while others maintain their sanity? One of the most dangerous factors, Zimbardo suggests, is blind obedience to authority. Whether it's a person, an institution, or a set of rules, authority can compel even the most ethical individuals to commit atrocities. Let's return briefly to Milgram's experiment. The participants weren't inherently evil. They were simply following orders, convinced they were serving a greater good. This tendency didn't begin with Milgram and certainly hasn't ended. Take, for example, the Jonestown Massacre. Jim Jones, a charismatic leader who initially preached utopian ideals, morphed into a tyrant. His followers, blinded by loyalty, obeyed his command to drink cyanide-laced Kool-Aid. Over 900 people died, not because they were evil, but because they were obedient. Another accomplice in the journey toward evil is de-individuation, the loss of personal accountability. Imagine yourself in the Milgram experiment again, your hand hovering over the shock button as the learner screams in pain. But it's not your fault, right? After all, the man in the lab coat said he'd take responsibility. This mindset is frighteningly common. In Zimbardo's research, he demonstrated it starkly by abandoning a car in 2 locations, the Bronx and Palo Alto. In the anonymous chaos of the Bronx, the car was vandalized within hours. In the close-knit community of Palo Alto, it remained untouched. When we believe our actions are untraceable, we're far more likely to abandon our moral compass. How do you make someone commit atrocities against another? The answer is chillingly simple. Convince them that the other person isn't fully human. This psychological trick has fueled some of history's darkest chapters. In one Stanford study by Albert Bandura, participants were told to punish a group of individuals, those described as animals or savages, received harsher treatment than those labeled thoughtful or understanding. It's the same twisted logic that justified the Nanking Massacre and countless other horrors. Words can be as dangerous as weapons. When wielded with precision, they can disguise even the most horrific actions. Enter the realm of euphemistic language, a polished vocabulary that transforms torture into enhanced interrogation or genocide into ethnic cleansing. It's like sweeping blood under a rug and pretending the floor is clean. Philip Zimbardo delves deeply into how this linguistic manipulation masks evil and enables perpetrators to sleep peacefully at night. In the Milgram experiment, for instance, participants were told they were contributing to science, helping to improve memory. They inflicted pain on another human being under the illusion of doing good. Fast forward to modern times, and you'll see the same mechanism at play. The United States invasion of Iraq and the torture at Abu Ghraib were not presented as atrocities, but as necessary actions in the fight against terrorism, justified as the lesser evil to protect national security. Immersed in these narratives, soldiers believed they were doing good, even as their actions crossed moral boundaries. The grim truth is that when narratives are manipulated and language is softened, evil becomes rationalized, justified, and even celebrated. The next time you hear polished rhetoric disguising cruelty as virtue, ask yourself, what's really happening behind those words? How do people justify causing harm to others? The answer lies in the systematic dismantling of empathy. When you stop seeing someone as fully human, it becomes disturbingly easy to justify their suffering. Zimbardo references a haunting study by Albert Bandura at Stanford University. Participants were tasked with punishing others based on their performance in a task. Beforehand, they overheard these groups being labeled either as thoughtful and understanding, or animals and savages. Predictably, the group dehumanized by labels received harsher punishment. This phenomenon is not confined to experiments. History echoes the same dark truth. During the Nanking Massacre, Japanese soldiers systematically dehumanized Chinese civilians, stripping them of their humanity and unleashing unspeakable brutality. The same pattern appears in every genocide, from the Holocaust to Rwanda, where victims were labeled as vermin or cockroaches. And yet, this isn't confined to the distant past. How often today do you hear someone referred to as an animal or scum? Each time a person is stripped of their humanity through language, the door to cruelty creaks open. The chilling reality is this: the moment you stop seeing someone as human, you invite the darkest parts of yourself to emerge. This journey into the shadowed corners of human nature isn't meant to leave you despairing. If anything, Zimbardo's work underscores a powerful truth. Just as the potential for evil exists within us, so too does the capacity for heroism. So, how do we resist the pull of the abyss? How do we hold firm against external forces that try to drag us into darkness? The key lies in personal responsibility. It's about owning your choices, even when anonymity or the comfort of obedience tempts you to let go of your moral compass. Consider the Milgram experiment once more. While 65% of participants obeyed orders to the bitter end, others refused. They stopped, not because they were superior, but because they chose to take responsibility for their actions. These individuals remind us that resisting evil isn't a superpower. It's a deliberate choice made in the face of pressure. This power to choose is a daily challenge. It requires vigilance and, more importantly, courage. Courage to stand up when it's easier to stay seated. Courage to question when others remain silent. How do you resist authority when it leads you down a dark path? The answer is deceptively simple. Question everything. Just because someone wears a uniform, holds a title, or speaks with authority doesn't make them infallible. Zimbardo's studies reveal a troubling truth. When authority is left unchecked, it can turn even the most ethical people into tools of cruelty. History is littered with examples. From the blind obedience in Milgram's experiment to the tragic events of Jonestown, where over 900 people followed Jim Jones to their deaths, the message is clear. Unchecked authority is dangerous. But you're not powerless. Within you is the ability to say no, to step back and resist. Sometimes that single act of defiance is all it takes to halt a moral freefall. The next time someone orders you to do something that clashes with your conscience. Pause, reflect, question. That brief moment of hesitation might be what separates a follower from a hero. Amid this exploration of evil, there's an equally vital counterpart: heroism. True heroism isn't about grandiose feats or superhuman strength. It's about acting decisively in moments that matter, often in ways that go unnoticed by the world. Take the story of Wesley Autry, the subway hero of New York. When a man suffering a seizure fell onto the subway tracks, Wesley didn't wait for someone else to act. He jumped onto the tracks, pressed the man into the trench between them, and shielded him as the train roared above. While others froze, Wesley acted. That is heroism. Small, decisive acts of courage in life's critical moments. It's putting the well-being of another above your own, even when the risk feels overwhelming. Zimbardo's message is clear. Heroism is within reach for anyone. It's a choice you can make every single day. Here's an uncomfortable truth. We all carry within us the potential for both good and evil. We are complex, contradictory beings, capable of acts of profound kindness and chilling cruelty. The difference between these extremes doesn't lie in our inherent nature. It lies in the choices we make, moment by moment. Zimbardo urges us to acknowledge this internal battle. The evil we fear isn't always an external force. It exists within us, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. But this isn't a call to despair. Instead, it's a reminder to remain vigilant. By accepting this duality, you become better equipped to guide your actions and make choices that reflect your best self. While we've explored the destructive potential of blind obedience, euphemistic language, and the loss of personal responsibility, there's another subtle force at play: inaction. In moments of moral crisis, failing to act can be as consequential as actively doing harm. This concept is deeply rooted in the bystander effect, a psychological phenomenon where individuals are less likely to intervene in emergencies when others are present. Consider the infamous case of Kitty Genovese in 1964. Kitty was attacked outside her apartment in New York City, while dozens of neighbors reportedly heard her cries for help. Few acted, assuming someone else would. Although the details of this case have been debated, the lesson remains poignant. When we assume others will step up, no one does. This passivity isn't born of malice, but of fear and confusion. Still, the consequences are devastating. Each moment we delay or hope, someone else will take responsibility. We enable the escalation of harm. Zimbardo's work reminds us that stepping forward, even when it feels risky, can be the difference between life and death, right and wrong. While much of this journey has focused on the individual, Zimbardo also emphasizes the power of community. Isolation breeds vulnerability, and toxic environments thrive in the absence of accountability. Conversely, strong communities create networks of support that empower individuals to act courageously. Think back to Zimbardo's abandoned car experiment. The vandalism in the Bronx occurred in an environment where people were disconnected and anonymous. In Palo Alto, where community ties were strong, the car remained untouched. This stark contrast underscores a fundamental truth. Connectedness protects us from moral collapse. When we foster communities rooted in empathy, accountability, and shared values, we create a buffer against the forces of dehumanization and obedience to unjust authority. These environments encourage individuals to challenge wrongdoing and provide the support needed to stand firm in the face of pressure. One of the simplest yet most profound acts of resistance against evil is to choose to see the humanity in others. This is the antidote to the dehumanization that enables cruelty. It sounds straightforward, but in a world where divisions are emphasized and differences magnified, it's easy to fall into the trap of us versus them. Whether the divide is racial, cultural, political, or ideological, the moment we label someone as other, we strip them of their complexity and humanity. Consider historical movements for justice, from the civil rights movement to the fight against apartheid. What unified their success wasn't just policy change, but a radical insistence on shared humanity. Activists like Martin Luther King Jr. called not for the dehumanization of oppressors, but for their transformation through compassion and accountability. This is where Zimbardo's work intersects with hope. To see others as fully human is to fortify ourselves against the ease of cruelty. Resisting evil isn't a one-time decision. It's a lifelong commitment to moral vigilance. Zimbardo teaches us that we must actively engage with our ethical compass daily, recognizing the subtle forces that shape our actions. Question narratives. When presented with euphemisms or justifications for harm, ask yourself what lies beneath the surface. Take responsibility. Avoid the temptation to shift blame or hide behind anonymity. Own your choices. Foster empathy. Make an effort to understand those who seem different from you. Challenge dehumanizing labels wherever they appear. Build courage. Practice standing up in small situations so that you're ready when larger moral challenges arise. These practices aren't just personal. They ripple outward. By committing to vigilance, you inspire others to do the same. If the potential for evil is within us, so too is the potential for profound goodness. The line between hero and villain, monster and savior, isn't fixed. It's fluid, shaped by our choices. Consider historical movements for justice, from the civil rights movement to the fight against apartheid. What unified their success wasn't just policy change, but a radical insistence on shared humanity. Activists like Martin Luther King Jr. called not for the dehumanization of oppressors, but for their transformation through compassion and accountability. This is where Zimbardo's work intersects with hope. To see others as fully human is to fortify ourselves against the ease of cruelty. Resisting evil isn't a one-time decision. It's a lifelong commitment to moral vigilance. Zimbardo teaches us that we must actively engage with our ethical compass daily, recognizing the subtle forces that shape our actions. Question narratives. When presented with euphemisms or justifications for harm, ask yourself what lies beneath the surface. Take responsibility. Avoid the temptation to shift blame or hide behind anonymity. Own your choices. Foster empathy. Make an effort to understand those who seem different from you. Challenge dehumanizing labels wherever they appear. Build courage. Practice standing up in small situations so that you're ready when larger moral challenges arise. These practices aren't just personal, they ripple outward. By committing to vigilance, you inspire others to do the same. If the potential for evil is within us, so too is the potential for profound goodness. The line between hero and villain, monster and savior, isn't fixed. It's fluid, shaped by our choices. Take inspiration from those who've chosen light in the face of darkness. People like Wesley Autry, who risked his life to save another, or the participants in the Milgram experiment who refused to continue despite immense pressure. These stories remind us that while the pull of the abyss is real, it's not inevitable. The most important takeaway from Zimbardo's The Lucifer Effect is that the story of your life is written not by your circumstances, but by your choices. Evil doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It creeps in through small compromises, unchecked authority, and ignored responsibilities. But goodness works the same way. It flourishes in small acts of courage, empathy, and resistance.